Schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a mental illness that affects how a person comprehends the world, how they think, and how they behave. This illness is characterized by hallucinations, which is seeing or hearing things that aren't there, and delusions, which is the belief in something that isn't true. People who have delusions will continue to believe them even when shown evidence that contradicts it. That is because, like hallucinations, delusions are irrational. Types. So there are 5 different types of schizophrenia. There's catatonic, residual, disorganized, undifferentiated, and paranoid. Paranoid is the most common and also the one that I'm going to be speaking about today. So the effects of smoking and drugs. The use of street drugs like LSD, methamphetamine, marijuana, hash, cannabis, and alcohol have all been connected to the increased likelihood of developing psychosis and schizophrenia. Researchers believe that using one of the drugs while the brain is still developing will stimulate the levels of dopamine in the brain, which will lead directly to schizophrenia. The drug's potential to produce psychotic conditions is most likely related to long-term changes within the brain created by THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, a substance found in marijuana. THC will affect chemicals in the brain like dopamine that transmit information between the nerve cells. It has been estimated that between 8 and 13% of all schizophrenia cases are heavily related to marijuana and cannabis use during teenage years. Numerous research studies have advised that the risk of developing schizophrenia is elevated when the drugs are used even by people under the age of 21, which is a period of time when the human brain is evolving quickly. One study followed 2,000 teenagers into adulthood. It showed that young people who smoked marijuana at least 5 times were twice as likely to have developed psychosis over the following 10 years compared to those who didn't smoke it. Kids and families that are untouched by psychosis have a 7 in 100,000 chance of developing it. If they smoke pot on a regular basis, their chances are doubled to 14 in 1,000. Basically, in the bottom right picture, it's showing you your chances within the family. So if you have an identical twin, you have a 48% chance of also being diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it goes all the way down to 1% when it's just in the general population. Adolescent incidence during teenage years. Schizophrenia usually presents itself in adolescence or early adulthood. During adolescence, the neural networks that provoke the capability of judgment, cognition, and behavioral control are ameliorated. Some circuits are modified, others remade, and some discarded altogether. The pruning of synapses goes on longer in people with schizophrenia than those without. This area is critical to connecting experience, memory, thought, and emotion into a rational view of the surroundings. This area creates and perfects itself during childhood and adolescence. Schizophrenia symptoms in teenagers are similar to those in adults, but the condition may be more difficult to recognize in this age group. This may be in part because some of the early symptoms in teenagers are common during teen years, such as withdrawal from friends and family, a drop in performance at school, trouble sleeping, and irritability. Finally, people with any biological predisposition have the highest risk of having this mental illness. If you don't know, biological predisposition is having basically any genes in the blood. So maybe your mother, an uncle, or a long cousin had one of these. In the bottom right picture over this, we can see that on the left, it's a normal synapse, and on the right, it's someone with schizophrenia. So there's a smaller soma, which is the blue triangle, decreased spine density, decreased dendrite length, and decreased presynaptic terminals. Boy-girl breakdown. Schizophrenia is more common in men than in women. The male-female ratio is 1 to 4. So, for every 1 woman, there are 4 men diagnosed. The beginning age for women is usually around 10 years later compared to those of men. Research shows that men have more paranoid delusions and hallucinations compared to women, who are more disorganized and have more negative symptoms. Some examples of negative symptoms are the loss of interest in daily activities, appearing to lack emotions, reduced ability to plan or carry out activities, neglect of personal hygiene, social withdrawal, and loss of motivation. Areas of the brain affected. The primary areas of the brain implicated in schizophrenia are the forebrain, the hindbrain, and the limbic system. The forebrain works to control cognition, so thinking, your knowing, your learning, and your judging, sensory, emotional expression, etc. The negative symptoms are found in the hindbrain. Damage to this part of the brain creates disorganized behaviors, which will mainly prevent normal socialization and unusual actions. Finally, as we all know, the limbic system controls moods and emotions. People with schizophrenia have diminished amount of protein in the brain. The protein is extremely important because it's associated with how the brain communicates with itself. So, if you were able to fix that and actually stimulate the protein levels in the brain, then there would be a possible cure for the cognitive aspect of this mental illness. The annual loss of gray matter for boys is greater than for girls. The loss of gray matter is important because when you lose the gray matter, you're losing nerve cell bodies, which are significant because they produce all the protein for the dendrites, axons, and synaptic terminals. This is actually illustrated in the picture on the right. We can see the brains on the right are brains that have been affected by schizophrenia, and we can see that the boys are actually losing more than the girls. Ventricles are also enlarged in people with schizophrenia, as is seen in the picture on the left. So it almost looks like a butterfly, and those are the ventricles that we can see are enlarged in people with schizophrenia and are smaller in those without. Recovery. There are no drugs to cure this mental illness, but art is being used and doctors are seeing noticeable differences. Basically what the art does is it's helping the stigma that's related to this mental illness.